will never be.
Yes. Hey everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar, Creating Inclusive Spaces in the Veterinary Profession, co-sponsored by PetDesk and Pawsibilities Vet Med. We are super excited to have Dr. Valerie Marcano here today to share her expertise and help you learn how to make your veterinary clinic inclusive for everyone. Real quick, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Ashley Cole, and I'm a former veterinary technician with over 5 years of experience in the industry. Here at PetDesk, I am building a community of veterinary professionals and thought leaders to fuel important discussions and increase awareness around topics affecting our industry, like this webinar. In case you're unfamiliar with PetDesk, we're a client engagement tool focused on helping clinics like yours guide clients to better care. And our platform and mobile app streamlines communication with your clients, therefore reducing the workload and saving time for everyone in the clinic. Now, before I hand the mic over to Dr. Marcano, I just want to go over some housekeeping points. So this webinar is RACE approved for 1 hour of CE credits. So those of you who have joined this talk live will receive your certificate soon, but this webinar will run for approximately 1 hour with time for Q&A at the end. But if you have a question or comment during the webinar, feel free to use the Q&A feature or chat function at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to answer it live. Otherwise, it will be addressed at the end. And with that, it's a pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Marcano.
Hello. I hope you can all hear me. Let me go ahead and share my screen. In this world of Zoom, you're all used to all of these different methodologies. So the usual question, can everybody see my screen okay? Nobody's saying no, so I'm going to assume yes. All right, well, hello, everybody. I am Valerie Marcano. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Pawsibilities Vet Med, and I'll tell you a little bit about Pawsibilities in just a minute. Today, we're going to be talking about creating inclusive spaces. If I can get Zoom to work. We're starting a little bit after the time. We had some technical difficulties, but we are carrying on. So what are we going to talk about today? First, we're going to define inclusion and what inclusive spaces in veterinary medicine are. We're going to discover some of the common pitfalls when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies. And we're going to talk about developing effective strategies for creating some of these inclusive spaces in veterinary medicine. I'm going to give you a little bit of an intro about myself. We'll go through some basic terminology, some background. We'll go through those inclusive spaces, and then we'll wrap up. There will be some questions here and there, but first I'm going to start with an introduction about myself. So I was born in Miami, Florida, raised in the Dominican Republic. I grew up with a lot of people from a lot of different communities because the Dominican Republic is a fairly diverse space because one of our major forms of economic growth is tourism. And so I was exposed to a lot of different cultures growing up, and moving to the US when I was 14, I moved to the Bronx, which is also a fairly diverse space. I went to Bronx International High School, which was specifically for people that had been in the US for 4 years or less. And from there, I went to Cornell University. At Cornell, I got to do the pre-freshman summer program where I've met a lot of people from across the US that were studying different disciplines. And as an animal sciences major and a pre-vet, I got exposed to a lot of animal agriculture as well as companion animal medicine. I got involved in research. I really enjoyed the time that I spent there. And from there, I worked as a technician at the vet school there for a year. And then I went to the University of Georgia, where I completed a vet and a PhD degrees. And since then, I've been working in the field. I started Pawsibilities back in 2020. And with my husband and a wonderful board of directors and advisory board, we have grown tremendously. In the journey that I've been on, I've also acquired a myriad of animals. We are up to 5 right now. Some of them are lovely, but also judgmental. I love all of my kids, but as you all know, I imagine that you all have that, where they sometimes drive me a little bit crazy too. So why did I create Pawsibilities Vet Med, or why did we decide to go on this journey? It's because as I was navigating the process of joining veterinary medicine, I realized that not a lot of people looked like me. And at the beginning, it was a lot of diversity. And as I went through that journey, less and less and less people looked like me. I spent a lot of time in different clubs that foster diversity and inclusion, learning about the topic, learning about the challenges. And with that, decided that I wanted to create a space where people felt included. Now, I want to preface this presentation by saying veterinary medicine is what I do, is not who I am. And in this field, I understand that this may be, a slightly inflammatory statement to make. And so with that, I want to know how you feel about it. So if we could launch the first poll question, that would be great. So how do you feel about the statement, veterinary medicine is what I do and not who I am? So if you could go ahead and answer that. I understand some people may be at work and not able to, but I'd love to see what you are thinking and what comes up when you see a statement like that one. Let's see. I'll go back to the statement so you can see it as well. And I don't know, am I able to see the results or anything like that?
I just ended them. So we
Okay,
have,
perfect.
okay, you're able to see them.
No.
Okay, it's 84% said yes and 16% said no.
Okay. Oh, perfect. Now I can see them. Haha. So yeah, so most of you answered similarly to how I feel, right? Like it is what you do, not who I am. And some of you disagree. Well, let's go through this presentation, and maybe at the end, if we have a few minutes to spare, we can talk about it a little bit more. I can do this. Okay, so overview of Pawsibilities Vet Med. My husband, Dr. Seth Andrews, and I started it officially in 2020. We've been working on it since I believe 2016 or 2017. It is a nonprofit organization that wants to improve recruitment and retention of underrepresented groups. And we do that through mentorship, resources, and professional development. Our vision is to build that robust and thriving community, fueling inclusivity in the veterinary profession and having that mirror the diversity of society. Our mission is to diversify all roles within veterinary medicine, and I'm not going to read you everything that is on this slide, but you can see that when we look at diversity and intersecting identities, we're looking at a lot of different groups of individuals and different demographics that make veterinary medicine more inclusive and make it whole and represent what society looks like. Our core values are leadership, community, and inclusion. We believe that everyone has something to learn and everyone has something to offer. And that is what we use to, the motto that we use to train our mentors, to build our community, and to thrive as a nonprofit. Now that I've told you a little bit about Pawsibilities Vet Med, we're going to go back. I'd like to have people start in a similar place. And so we're going to go through some basic terminology. And with inclusivity, many of you know, before that has diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging. There are a lot of terms associated with them. So if we could launch the second one, I just want to get a general idea of those of you in the room, which of these terms are you comfortable with? And it's not, we're still going to go through them. But yeah, just be honest. Tell me, are you comfortable with some of these terms? Are you not? And go ahead and complete the poll. Right, I don't know. All right, so as you guys do that, I can go ahead and move on to the next slide. We'll see when the results come up. But the next slide is just talking about diversity. Oh, there we go. Okay, so about half the room is familiar with the term diversity, and about a third of the room is familiar with the term equity, about half with inclusion, and a little bit less with things like microaggressions. It's good to see that a number of people in the room are familiar with all of the terms above. So no worries at all. We're going to go through a lot of these terms today. So thank you so much for sharing. So we're going to start with diversity. Diversity is just the presence of difference, right? That's all it means. So difference can mean race, gender, sexual orientation. It can mean nationality, socioeconomic background. It can be a language, a ability, or age. And so when we talk about diversity, we're not talking about one individual. Me as a person, I am not diverse. I am a member of communities that are underrepresented. And so when I come into the room, I increase the diversity of that room if the room has people who look differently from me or who have different experiences from me. So as an individual, as a person, I am not diverse. But in a room where there are individuals from multiple generations, from multiple genders and sexual orientations and ethnicities, and who speak different languages and who have grown up in different countries, that room is a diverse room. Generally, the diversity efforts, when we talk about them, it is about focusing on underrepresented populations and marginalized communities. So communities that may not have had the same opportunities to get in that room as other communities. Now, veterinary medicine, as many of you may have heard before, is not as diverse as we would like it to be. It is one of the least diverse professions in the US, and the consumers of veterinary services are pretty diverse. And so that's why part of why we're here today. Include equity. Getting a little bit ahead of myself. First of all, a lot of the graphs that I'm going to show you today, I have taken from the Deloitte review. It has a great article going through the insights of diversity and inclusion, doing analysis of different studies on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I'm using some of the graphics today. So when it comes to equity, the impact of having gaps in diversity results in inequity. And inequity is differences in access to and quality of services. Right, so it's all about justice, it's about fairness, it's looking at the processes, the procedures, the resources, and the access. And usually when we tackle equity issues, we need an understanding of what the root causes of these disparities are. So on the image on the left, it is assumed that everybody benefits from the same support. But as you can see, being treated equally may not get each of those individuals what they need in order to thrive in a community. Now, when individuals are giving different support to make it possible, then we start getting into equitable. And equity is all about providing those communities what they need to thrive in the same spaces. Theoretically, in an ideal world, we can look at a view in which none of these differences in support have to be provided because the root cause of that inequality was already addressed. And so the systemic barrier keeping some of these and keeping individuals from certain communities from having access has been removed. And so that is, in a nutshell, what equity is looking at. Then inclusion, it is always said that if diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is like being asked to dance. It is about creating an environment where different individuals feel welcome and where they feel valued. Inclusion is achieved when the institution is inviting to all. So it weighs to the degree in which individuals are able to participate fully in the decision-making decisions and the processes and in the opportunities. It's hard to feel included as a team member, as a client, as a customer, when things that you see around you do not represent who you are, what your values are, what you believe in, right? So it's not just enough to be in that room, to be given a chair to sit in. Inclusion is really feeling as though you can, like, creating a space in which individuals can feel comfortable enough to bring their whole selves wherever they go. So it looks at that fairness, that respect. It's a safe and open environment that leads to empowerment, that leads to growth. Now, belonging has been added, right? So we went from diversity and inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. Belonging is when you look at inclusion efforts, right, looking at the efforts and the behaviors that can be fostered by the different organizations and can be actually be lived by the individuals within that organization, belonging is what the employee themselves feel as a result from those inclusive efforts. So when we look at diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts at different organizations, individuals feel welcomed and there is representation and they feel accepted as a member of that group. They feel valued, they feel connected, whether that is, with the company, with the organization, with the group of friends, with the neighborhood, whatever that may be. And building that environment allows everyone to be able to express their thoughts, their ideas, and their perspectives. So it's ensuring that all of those individuals have access to those same opportunities. Now, when we look at things that can harm belonging in the workspace, bias, both explicit and implicit, can contribute to some of these gaps in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I always like to talk about bias. It is an inclination for or against an idea, an object, a group, or an individual, and biases generally are learned. They're highly dependent on variables like someone's socioeconomic status, their ethnicity, their educational background, and there are two forms. So the explicit form, which are directly expressed and are conscious, and then the implicit or the subconscious, and these are often expressed indirectly. So an example of an explicit bias will be when someone walks in the room, and actually we're going to leave the examples for later because I want to move on because we're running a little bit behind time. So exploring implicit bias a little bit more, because we aren't aware of some of these implicit biases, these can be dangerous. They can lead to saying things that can cause harm to others and even taking actions that are harmful to other individuals. But inherently, bias is not bad, right? Bias is a shortcut that our brain is taking in order to get most efficiently from point A to point B. So an example of that would be when you drive home from work every day, right? So you take the same route maybe every day, and every now and again you pull up to your driveway and you're like, oh my gosh, I got home. I don't remember, half of that drive, because you've been doing it every day, day after day, day after day. So when something comes that allows you to take a moment, say there was a traffic jam that you weren't anticipated, or there was a road that was under construction, there was a building that was demolished that was like caught your attention. That is when you need to pay attention, right? So those are the things that bring you out of that shortcut to say, look, something is changing, something is different. And maybe this shortcut that your brain is taking is not appropriate for this situation. Maybe we need to reassess, right? If it's something like a traffic jam, maybe there's a different street that we take. So there are times when these shortcuts can lead us to trouble, right? Because if we're on autopilot all the time, we may hurt other people. However, they're not always harmful. Sometimes they're just a way in which our brains become most efficient. In terms of combating implicit bias, because it can creep into every relationship that you have and they're unconscious, you have to take an active step in overcoming them. Right? So they may not align with the personal identity that you have. They're subconscious, right? And so when you look at different ways to get out of that implicit bias, you have to be open to the fact that they exist, right? So their existence is there. They influence your cognition. They influence your interpretation of the room that you walk into. And as you become aware of what some of those biases are, you're able to pay attention to when things don't match that bias. So pay attention to that surprise. Why? Asking why repeatedly can help you understand why you may have thought that, that implicit bias existed, but it may give you an idea of why that may be harmful to others. So asking why 25 times to test your decision for bias is one of the ways that you can combat implicit bias. You can reduce the physical, the emotional, and the cognitive stressors in the environment. So because our brains are driven by efficiency, right, stress tries to make us more efficient. And so you want to make sure your brain can engage these cognitive biases when it should. And then you want to expand your networks and make sure that you continue to include people from different experiences, from different perspectives onto your network and your social circle. Okay, so why am I telling you all about biases? Because they're very harmful to the workspace, just like microaggressions are. The term microaggression has been, named numerous, like in the last few years. I think people are hearing it more and more and more. It was first proposed by psychiatrist Chester Pierce in the 1970s. And Dr. Pierce, when he coined the term, coined it specifically in the concept of race and ethnicity. So the initial definition talked about brief everyday exchanges that send denigrated messages to people of color. Right now, we are expanding the term, and it is used within other demographics that are also underserved and underrepresented. And so while these microaggressions or these, brief exchange may seem like they're very small, they can really, really quickly add up. And as you see in some of these graphs, a lot of individuals of color throughout the country face these, especially looking at the Black and African American professional population in which the survey was done. Looking at the effects of discrimination, right? It can lead to stress, to anxiety, to burnout, to compromised learning, to decreasing confidence, to depression, to increase hypertension. And so specifically looking at the workspace, you can see how things like discrimination and microaggressions and bias can lead not only to an uncomfortable work environment, but also to burnout and to compassion fatigue and to a lot of the anxiety and depression and issues that we're seeing in veterinary medicine. So now that we're a little bit back onto that, general terminology, and we're all hopefully starting in the same place, let's talk about why it matters. So diverse teams make better business decisions up to 80%, 87% of the time, right? These teams that follow these inclusive processes can make decisions twice as fast with half the meetings. Inclusion itself can boost team results by 60%. Gender diverse teams make better business decisions like up to a quarter of the time, and including age and geographic diversity can increase that advantage to like 50%. And this is based on a study by Cloverpop in 2017. So the statistically significant correlation between more diverse teams and financial performance holds true in several different studies, like the McKinsey report of 2018, where they looked at companies in the top quartile for ethnic and cultural diversity. And they saw that teams that had more diverse leadership had, I think it was about a third more, or were a third more likely to have industry-leading profitability. So in the world, it creates compassion, it creates connection and empathy and gratitude and understanding. In the workplace, it is innovative, it is profitable, and it increases our service. So it is beneficial to the veterinary profession as a whole. Now, looking at race and ethnicity, and this is just one example, again, of diversity, one measure of diversity, looking in light blue at the total US population, this is based on the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics from 2021, veterinary medicine is falling behind. Right, so whereas 77% of the population in 2021 identified as white, non-Hispanic, and Latino, 93% of veterinarians in the US identified that way. So we're falling behind. 88% when you look at veterinary technologists and technicians, and 89% when you look at vet assistants and lab animal caretakers. Looking at just veterinarians, look at the 18% of the population identifying as Hispanic and Latino compared to less than 5% of veterinarians. And even looking at the Black and African American population, looking at that 12% of the US population with your 1.2% of Black or African American veterinarians. And how do we fix that, right? When we have it's multifactorial. There isn't one thing that is going to fix this problem. But starting with access to the veterinary profession, right? Seeing that exposure is different for different communities, even looking at, rural versus urban communities. Where are the veterinary deserts? In places where there are veterinarians, are they representative of the population? Are there opportunities that people can follow, right? Looking at belonging, when the individuals are going out to get experiences and to get jobs, do they feel welcome? The cost of veterinary medicine, and looking at the study that AAVMC did when they reported the 2019 survey analysis, where they talked about what admissions correlate with, right? So admissions to veterinary medicine, to veterinary school specifically, correlated with having better mentoring experiences, more research hours, more AP courses. Individuals that had more debt and took more community college courses, or were more likely to have community college courses, were less likely to get into veterinary school. So the discrepancy is missed opportunities, right? Just for providers, for underutilization of services, for client communication, for treatment plans, for the comfort level that our clients have, and also accessibility to veterinary medicine. But not just that, it also impacts the advances that we have in the profession, right? Research advances, economic advances. According to the Harvard Business Review, a team that has a member that shares a client's ethnicity is 152% more likely than another team to understand that client. So we are imbalanced when it comes to veterinary medicine. And as a profession, as a whole, we're looking at the debt income and debt to income ratio, and it's not getting better, right? So I've told you the terminology, I've given you some background, and now we're going to get into what are some of the strategies to building these inclusive spaces, because as we can see, they are not only the right thing to do, but also profitable. So I'm going back to the study, so the diversity and inclusion revolution, because it has, they used 50 organizations around the world. They surveyed, I think once they processed all the data, they had over 1 million employees that they were looking at, and they used, I think, it was 7 or 8 major research studies. And in this report, they identified 6 traits or 6 qualities that were interrelated and mutually reinforcing. Starting with commitment. So inclusive leaders committed. They were deeply committed to diversity and inclusion in line with their personal values. They believed the business case for diversity and inclusion. They articulated that commitment. They also had the courage. They were humble about what their own capabilities were, and they invited contributions by other people into the room. They were cognizant of their bias. They knew that they had their own blind spots and their own flaws, that there were flaws in the system. And they worked hard to make sure that these opportunities were available to others, because they understood the challenges with accessibility. They were curious, so they had an open mindset, deeply curious about others, right? Listening without judgment, seeking to understand other individuals and the challenges they face. They were culturally intelligent, so attentive to other individuals' cultures and able to adapt as they needed to. They were also collaborative. They empowered other individuals. They created conditions in which the teams worked together. They were cohesive. And so these are the environments in which diversity flourishes. Looking at inclusive leadership and team performance, when you have an inclusive leader, individual feelings of inclusion in the workspace increase just by having that. When you think about leadership, though, many of us in veterinary medicine don't necessarily consider ourselves leaders, right? And oftentimes the individuals that are being promoted into leadership positions are individuals that have a lot of experience in veterinary medicine and may have no training in leadership. And so I want you to think about 2 things. First, are we promoting individuals into leadership positions that have the skills to be in that leadership position? And if not, are we allowing for them to develop those skills? Are we giving them a chance to grow as a leader into that position? But also, could the word leadership apply to more than those individuals that are in a quote unquote leadership position, right? the veterinarian of the team, the technician of the team, the assistant of the team, your individual that is doing all of the scheduling, right? All of those individuals are leaders within their area. And as veterinarians and as veterinary technicians, we've all had individuals that come to us seeking advice and seeking input in how to join this profession, how to better the profession, how to do anything, right? Like you've had your cousin's friends, nephews, like wife that wanted to join veterinary medicine and they're asking you for advice, right? That's mentorship, that's advising, that's coaching, that's leadership. And so when I speak of a leader, I'm not just talking about a team leader specifically, right? Let's think about leadership in a more broadly perspective, that we can all be leaders within our teams. And it's not like one of these like kumbaya, everybody's a leader, right? Like you're a leader, everybody gets a car, like whatever it is. No, this is just realizing the impact that each of you have in your workspace, right? It takes an inclusive leader to help build that inclusion in the workspace. But it takes just one or two toxic people to decrease that, right? So individual feelings of inclusion, team performance, right? And with that team performance, not just looking at how that team is performing on a day-to-day basis, but also decision-making, team collaboration, how cohesive is that team? So in the 2017 Clover Pup study that I mentioned, I mentioned that in like these inclusive teams make decisions twice as fast with half the meetings. So it's not just the diversity, right? And diversity does not become, say, profitable if we're thinking about the economic or financial impacts of diversity without inclusion. In fact, diversity is completely lost without inclusion, because unless individuals are able to voice their opinions without repercussion, and you're able to have that diversity of opinion and that diversity of thought, and that is considered at the managerial level, inclusion does not exist. And without inclusion, you are not going to see those benefits that are usually attributed to diversity, because a lot of those are actually due to the inclusive space itself. So when you look at inclusive cultures, organizations that have these cultures are better able to meet their targets. They perform better, they provide better. And in veterinary medicine, we work with our clients better. We provide better medicine because we're able to understand our diverse clientele. All right, so I've drilled this a whole bunch. So now let's go to a poll question. I know I'm just like kind of preaching here a little bit, and with it being a little less interactive, if you have any thoughts or questions, like feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A. But in the meantime, let's launch our third poll question, and that is, have you worked in an inclusive environment? I want to know if you've been in an inclusive workspace before. And now when I mention, workspace, this is what we're focusing for today's webinar, but again, inclusivity goes beyond that, right? We're looking at our organizations, we're looking at our neighborhoods, our friend groups, are people getting along? Is there a toxic environment within our friendship groups, right? So for this specific question, I want you to tell me a little bit more about the inclusive space that you've worked in. If you said yes, I want you to put in the chat, if you can, a couple of examples of what were things that made you feel included. And if you have worked in a workspace that did not feel inclusive, I want you to tell me what were some of those things. So put in like a yes, inclusive, these are a couple of the things, not inclusive, these are a couple of the things. Feel free. I don't know if I thought the chat was enabled, but maybe it isn't. And if it isn't, yeah, you can feel free to put it in the Q&A. So have you worked in an inclusive space before? Our results show that 81% of individuals felt that they worked in an inclusive space. Then our next question is, have you worked in a space that was not inclusive? Which of those, chat is disabled. Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, so our final poll question is, have you worked in a workplace that did not feel inclusive? And while we do that, I'll start going through some of the questions. So having pronouns respective is a way to create inclusion. Inclusive, yes. Superior modeled way. The superiors modeled the way. That's great. Have we launched the last poll question? I wasn't sure if
We have I can launch it right now.
yeah, that'd be great. Awesome. Yes, emphasis on DEI training, management picking favorites, and bullying. Yeah, so that would be, those are some traits of not inclusive spaces. Yeah, the maturity of the group. Somebody mentioned that when they worked in an inclusive environment, it felt like it was because of the maturity of the group, and that immature people made it a less inclusive environment. So thank you all so much for those answers. And then somebody said monthly potlucks in our team, suggested food themes based on suggestions. I love it. Yeah, this is great. Thank you all for providing all of these comments. I like the boy club feel. Okay. There was diversity and felt inclusive. The company did a lot of effort for equity. I like that. Somebody said, when I worked in a place that wasn't inclusive, I felt uncomfortable daily, right? So coming back to that, the anxiety, the depression, the burnout, the compassion fatigue. And it's very interesting, right? So we had about 80% of people who said that they have worked in an inclusive workspace. And we also have about 80% of people who said they have worked in a space that is not inclusive. So let's talk about some of the efforts and some of the strategies that can be made in inclusive workspaces. So we talked about, somebody mentioned the training, right? So that is what I personally call the ground rules. So you have inclusivity statements, you have diversity, equity, and inclusion training, you have codes of conduct. Okay, they're there. Now what? Right. So the literature tells us that mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion training actually can make individuals who are antagonistic for diversity and inclusion training, they can make them more antagonistic about diversity and inclusion. And then a lot of times the efforts that create change are the ones where individuals volunteer their time, where they get to expand their network and their vision of the world. However, we have to have those trainings in place because we need individuals to know what these ground rules are. With these codes of conduct, do they exist? Are there protocols in place? And if the protocols are in place, does the team know what those protocols are? Are they enforceable? Right. So it's not just creating them and it's not just establishing. The bare minimum is to have these trainings, these statements, these conduct codes. The actual work there is to make sure everybody knows that they're there, that they will be enforced, and when a situation happens, actually enforcing them. We talk about a lot about different generations and what individuals from different generations are looking for in a workplace. And the reality is, yes, there are generational differences, but these differences are not happening because between 1 year and another year, somebody's personality completely changed, right? Because they were born 1 year late, they're not gonna be able to identify with millennials at all, right? It is a gradient based on the experiences that individuals have had. And right now, based on what the research says, is that top talent stays when they feel appreciated and valued, when they are empowered, when they're part of the mission, where they feel like they're paid their worth, when they're promoted, when they're challenged, when they're involved. You can see a lot of these, right? So first of all, starting with paying well, people need to be compensated for their time. But if you look at the rest of these, most of them are actionable, right? So they want to be mentored. That is an active process. They want to feel challenged. They want to feel like they can contribute, like they're part of that team. They want to feel included. So when we go back to some of these behaviors that unlock innovation across the board, we want to make sure that everyone is heard, right? And that doesn't mean that because I said something, everybody's going to listen to me, right? And this is what we're going to do. The whole point is that all of those opinions are out and about. And as a team, we can make a decision to take the best path. Now, ensuring everyone is heard, making it safe to propose novel ideas, giving team members decision-making authority, sharing credit for successes, giving actionable feedback, implementing feedback from the team, right? So leaders that give diverse voices equal airtime are about twice as likely as others to unleash the inside of inclusion within the workspaces, right? It makes the team almost 4 times as likely to contribute. This is based on a study by Hewlett et al. In 2013, where they talked about how diversity can drive innovation in the Harvard Business Review, right? So it's actionable. Just saying that you value diversity, equity, and inclusion is not enough. Can your team see that? Are you giving individuals within your team a voice? Now, we talked about the training, right? The mandatory trainings and how they don't necessarily contribute. However, we still have to educate people on what are those basics, right? What is bias? What are microaggressions? How do we combat them? And you have to take an active role in those. If your leader is active and excited and empowers you to learn and to grow, you're much more likely to, first of all, stay at that job. Second of all, pass that culture down within your team and ensure that a lot of those codes of conduct are enforced. The research shows, right, there are, for all the DEI challenges that we face in the workplace today, a lot of these programs are not successful because we're using the same strategies that we're using, 50, 60 years ago. Cornell University's ILR actually found that mentoring programs, for example, boosted minority representation at the management level by 10 to 25%. They also found that it dramatically improved the promotion and the retention of minorities and women, because women and minorities are the first people to sign up for these programs, because a lot of times they're the least likely to find mentors in other ways. And so looking at some of these programs that bring in results, all of these actionable items are going to help you diversify your team. And with diversity, as long as you have a lot of inclusivity or inclusion implementing strategies, you can build that team. The importance is not just going out and finding diversity, but how are you going to retain it? And inclusion is your key, right? So mentoring, for example, boosts minority representation, increases promotion and retention rates, it lessens bias, and it builds resilience. So I'm just putting my plug in there, right? Pawsibilities Vet Med is all about mentorship, but I'm not going to go into a ton of the details because we're running out of time. So we also want to encourage allyship. So you have to understand your own privilege. I have privilege. Many of us have privilege. And different demographics have different privileges, right? So understanding your biases, your privileges, listening, doing your own work, speaking up, apologizing when you mess up, being active, right? These are all tips of allies. Again, active. When we look at understanding like cultural competency and cultural humility, right, is that big pyramid where cultural humility is holding some of those systems accountable, is understanding the power imbalances. But when you look at cultural competency, you have to gain some of that cultural knowledge. You have to develop that self-awareness that you may not know what you don't know. Finally, celebrate your team. Actually, not finally, we have more. I'm getting ahead of myself. Celebrating your team. So celebrating the successes, celebrating the things that didn't quite go as well as they needed to, talking about what could have gone better, right? Making your team feel like they are part of the team, right? And not just someone unilaterally making those decisions. Apparently my picture for the slide didn't load, but also supporting community involvement, because ultimately we are an industry that serves a community, right? And the community that we serve should feel included. So a lot of these inclusivity strategies are not just for our team, right? But they reflect in how we work with our clients, with our customers, and with the community at large. So supporting that involvement with the community is really important. And I know I went through these a little bit quickly. So I'm just going to leave you with some of those conclusions so that we have a couple of minutes in case there are some questions. I see there might be some in the chat. So inclusion requires knowledge. It requires knowledge of diversity and equity. It is paramount to your team's success. And some of these challenges are special to Vet Med, right? Some of the accessibility challenges, for example, but the reality is most of them are not. They're just workspace challenges. these are the ones that I went through today. They don't cover everything. They're not gonna they're not a cure-all. And I don't recommend you go through and you're like, we're gonna implement all of these today, right? You have to start small so that you stick with them. So start with one, start with two, and see how making those changes impacts your team, and involve your team, right? When you're establishing those ground rules, when you have to identify what is important to your team. What is the community that you're trying to serve, and what is important to that community? I'll come back to this slide at the end, but I just wanted to say thank you all for having me here. This is the Pawsibilities Vet Med. We have a lot of the advisory board and board of directors here, and just wanted to thank the 2022 sponsors for Pawsibilities Vet Med, and PetDesk for having me here today. Do we go through that last slide now, or do you want me to go through the chat? What do we?
Either way, we can run a few minutes over.
Okay. So let me just look. I see. Yeah, so the Harvard implicit, the project implicit from Harvard. Thank you for posting the link in the chat. I had it up on the. Let's go back. I know I went through a lot of slides today, and we went through them a little bit fast. But yeah, the project implicit is a really important resource to utilize. What questions do you guys have? Let's see. If there are some questions that I'm missing, Ashley, please help me find them, because I know we had some of the comments, so it's kind of going back and forth. Yeah, hiring of employees with diverse backgrounds to make my team well-rounded. And I see that comment as, one of the ways to increase inclusivity. Let's also remember that just hiring diverse teams without having support for those individuals within your group is a little bit counterproductive, right? Because then you're going to have, you spend a lot of effort in recruitment. We need to also spend a lot of time with retention and looking at the processes that are going to allow individuals from different backgrounds to succeed. I previously worked in a non-inclusive environment. Current office is inclusive. Staff are from, very diverse staff. All awesome. No, that sounds fantastic. I've worked in an inclusive and supportive workspace, but it's shifted with the pandemic. Yeah, so culture is shifting a lot in a lot of environments. And so it's a matter of figuring out what needs to shift and what changes do you need to do to maintain that inclusion. I said I was going to go back to that last slide that had the summary. Okay. Any ideas? Let's see. I feel since COVID, we aren't having meetings. We're losing that connection and communication with each other. Do you have any ideas, as most of our teams are not comfortable with a meeting yet? So I've had teams that have done like online trivia. So you can do trivia together. But the reality is the easiest way to do that is to kind of come up with a few ideas, right? Like there's meetings online, or we can do some potlucks, or we can create Slack channels, or we can create competitions, or like, who's going to post a recipe this week, or whatever it is. But the reality is your team has to figure out what works for them, right? So working remotely, you have to take advantage of the technology that you have at hand. So are they interested in doing, like, I think in some of the groups that I've been, we've done like costume meetings, right? And trivia and things like that. So is that something that your team would appreciate? Some teams may, and some may not, right? There's been some companies that do remotely, like they'll send like a snack box and then you all hang out together and eat it together. And planning for when you can and when the team does feel comfortable getting together, and are there strategies that you can utilize so that you can safely meet together? So we've had with one of the companies that I work with, we met in person and about a third of the team ended up with COVID, right? So should we have required vaccinations? Should we have testing prior to and test accessible there, masking and using hand sanitizer? When did everybody get their last booster, right? So things like that. Making sure that if you are doing hybrid meetings, the people that are hybrid can actually partake in that meeting. That's a lot of what I see, right? So the technology is just not quite in par with the rest of us. So those individuals feel left out a little bit. So I hope that is helpful. Yeah, and somebody commented that there's a company that does paint and sips remote for teams. So I see in the chat a couple of comments. The knowledge gain can certainly be extended to our clients. I've learned a lot working in a town with a very large homeless population. Yes, absolutely. So part of it is that creating these inclusive spaces really extends to everything we do within our profession, right? So we will go forth and allow you to better understand the community, because the team that you have is better able to understand that community and to know the challenges that that community faces. I see. So I was one of the people who answered that I have a diverse team. It's not enough to throw different groups in the same space. So make sure that your staff values diversity. Yes, absolutely. So making sure that your staff values diversity and that they understand that comments and actions that are unsupportive of diversity have consequences, right? It's not like if somebody does something unintentional, they're going to get fired, right? It's not being afraid of HR, but it's realizing that as a team, we have to be empathetic, and we have to understand that some of us don't get to leave our personal lives outside the door when we walk into the door, right? So as a woman of color, I'm a woman of color when I walk into every single room. So I don't get to leave that part of me somewhere else. And so realizing that at work, if somebody makes, a hurtful comment, I may not be able to just kind of blow it off and pretend it didn't happen. So yeah. Other comments, thoughts, questions, concerns? Yes, so I've looked into Journey for Teams. Thank you, Brandy. I'd love to talk more about it. I'll put in the possibilities. That is the possibilities email address, and then I'll go up to that last slide.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Just really appreciate you sharing your insights and knowledge with us today. I think we all appreciate it. I just wanted to give a little bit of a reminder before everyone heads out. We are running a giveaway for our new PetDesk starter platform. The deal is if you attend a demo before March 23rd, you'll receive a brand new Classic 3 Littman stethoscope. And if you don't know what PetDesk starter is, it's our new product bundle, which is now available for $99 a month. And we bundled our platform's essential, easiest to use tools for clinics to start saving time and improving the client experience. So you can go ahead and head over to petdesk.com/startheart, or click the link in the chat to learn more. But I wanted to say thank you to everyone who joined this live talk. Thank you, Valerie, Dr. Marcano. We will give out the CE certificates within the next 48 hours. If you don't hear from us, just let us know. But thank you all for joining, and we hope to see you guys next time.